Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever wondered how a simple question, just a little thought, can spiral out and actually change the world? Well, today we're going to pull back that curtain. We're going on the researcher's journey, looking at the step-by-step process that turns plain old curiosity into a real, solid discovery.
Right? Every single major breakthrough starts with that little phrase, what if? But how do you actually get from a fleeting thought to a full-blown, structured investigation? Let's break down that process, turning a simple question into a genuine quest for answers.
So, just like any great adventure, research has to have a starting point, and that very first step is all about defining your research problem. You can think of it as literally drawing the map that's going to guide your entire investigation from here on out.
So, how do you do it? Well, imagine you're interested in something like the impact of social media on teenagers. That's a huge topic. So the key is to break it down. Are you curious about its effect on sleep? Maybe self-esteem? Or what about academic performance? By narrowing your focus like this, you can turn a broad interest into a specific and, most importantly, an answerable question.
This quote, this really hits the nail on the head. It drives home just how critical this first step is. A poorly formulated problem, it can send you down a total rabbit hole of irrelevant data and, just inconclusive results. But a really well-defined problem is like a compass. It keeps you pointed in the right direction for the entire journey.
Think about it. You wouldn't try to climb a huge mountain without checking the weather or studying the routes that other people have taken, right? Well, a literature review is exactly the same idea. It's your chance to learn from the successes and the failures of other researchers, so you can build on their work and not, waste time reinventing the wheel.
Okay, so once you've surveyed the landscape and you know what's already out there, it's time to chart your own course. And that brings us to our next crucial step, setting really clear objectives for your research.
Your objectives are basically the action plan for your research. They're not just vague wishes, they have to be concrete goals. So instead of saying something like, I want to learn about social media and teens, you'd say, I will investigate the correlation between daily time spent on Instagram and self-reported anxiety levels in 14 to 16-year-olds. See the difference? It's all about that specificity.
And this is a perfect example of how that works in practice. The main goal? That's the big, ambitious one. But then, the sub-objectives break it down into these smaller, much more achievable steps. By tackling each of these little mini-quests, you eventually reach your main objective. It makes the whole thing manageable.
So we've got our map, and we've got our destination. Now we need to figure out what we're actually going to be looking at along the way. In the world of research, we call these things variables. Simply put, anything that can change or vary is a variable. But in research, we have to be super specific. You can't just measure happiness. You have to define it in a way that's actually measurable. So for example, you could measure the number of times a person smiles in an hour, or maybe their score on a happiness scale. This whole process of turning abstract ideas into something you can measure is called operationalization. Okay, this slide really gets to the heart of most research. It's all about that relationship between cause and effect. The independent variable, that's the one you change or manipulate. It's the cause. And the dependent variable, that's the one you measure to see if there's a change. It's the effect.
Of course, the real world is messy, isn't it? Other factors can always sneak in and kind of mess with your results. These are called extraneous variables, and trust me, they are the bane of every researcher's existence. In our coaching example, a student's diet, their sleep habits, heck, even their mood on test day could all affect their performance. A good researcher has to be a bit of a detective, always trying to identify and control for these hidden influences. All right, now that we understand the key players in our research story, it's time to make a prediction about how we think they'll interact. This is where the hypothesis comes in. A hypothesis is way more than just a hunch. It's a specific, testable statement about the relationship between your variables. So, for example, instead of just guessing that social media is bad for teens, you might hypothesize that teenagers who spend more than 2 hours a day on social media will report higher levels of anxiety than those who spend less than 30 minutes a day. It's a clear, testable prediction.
Now, here's a really key concept in scientific thinking. You don't actually try to prove your hypothesis is true. It's kind of backward. Instead, you try to prove that the opposite is false. This opposite is called the null hypothesis, and it's basically the default assumption that there's no relationship at all between your variables.
Think of it like a courtroom drama. The null hypothesis is the defendant, and it's presumed innocent, meaning there's no effect. Your job as the researcher is to act as the prosecutor, presenting evidence, your data, to convince the jury to reject that null hypothesis. If you succeed, if you show enough evidence, then your alternative hypothesis, your original prediction, is basically declared the winner. It's accepted. We've laid out the what and the why of our research, so now it's time to figure out the how. The final piece of our puzzle is the research design, which is really our game plan for actually carrying out the whole study.
Your research design is the blueprint for your entire study. It answers all those practical questions like, who are you going to study? How are you going to collect your data? What statistical tests will you use to analyze it? A really solid research design makes sure that your results are both valid and reliable.
One of the very first choices you'll make is about timing. Are you interested in a single moment, kind of like a photograph? Well, that's a cross-sectional study. Or do you want to see how things change over a period of time, more like a movie? That's a longitudinal study. Each approach has its own strengths and weaknesses, and it all depends on your research question.
Next up, you have to decide how involved you're going to be. Are you going to be like a director, actively manipulating the scene to see what happens? That's an experimental study. For instance, you might give one group of students a new teaching method and compare their scores to a control group. Or are you going to be more like a documentary filmmaker, just observing and recording events as they naturally happen? That's a non-experimental study.
So there you have it, the complete roadmap for turning a simple question into a powerful engine for discovery. This process, this is at the heart of every single scientific breakthrough, from curing diseases to exploring the cosmos. It's how we move from I wonder to I know. The world is just full of unanswered questions. So, which one are you going to tackle first?